Thank you, Brother Paul. What a delight and joy it is to be here today. I enjoyed that beautiful music. I loved it. I go into some churches and they're entertaining, and I go into others that are singing like it's a funeral, but you all sing like you come to meet Jesus. I like that, and thank you so much. Your music director does a wonderful, wonderful job, and I suspect when she sits down, she'll crash and go to sleep while I preach if I'm not careful, burning all that energy up here this morning. I was a minister of music for many years, and one Sunday my pastor said this to me, and I was told about it later. He said that when I sat down and he opened his Bible and said, "Take your Bibles and turn," I went to sleep, and when he said amen and prayed, I woke up with that invitation. So there was some truth to that. It's been my privilege now for over 18 years to serve as your missionary across the Appalachian Mountain Range, and 10 of those years also up and down the Mississippi River Delta. And I want to thank you for allowing me this time to have served as your missionary. I was a pastor in Reno, Georgia, Mount Pisgah Baptist Church, when God called me to serve in missions. And it was a period of pastoring that every pastor dreams of. And it was a once-in-a-lifetime event, because in 3 years we saw over 300 people come to Christ. And I can't explain it except it was God. And it was an exciting period of time watching people come to faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. But next Sunday I will become pastor of Wolf Fork Baptist Church in Rayburn Gap, Georgia. If you're up in Clayton or Hiawassee or Mountain City or Dillard, and you're looking for a church to go to on Sunday, I'll be out in the Gap at Wolf Fork. I can look out the front of the church right now and see cabbage fields, and out the back and look at the mountains. So that's kind of where I will be. And I'm excited about getting to return back to the pastorate after being away for a little over 18 years. Your pastor mentioned that I knew Reginald, and I knew he was director of missions when I first met him coming into Virginia with the Powell River Baptist Association, and he would have made it as a director of missions, except he pulled for the wrong football team, collegiate-wise. And up where I'm from, people that are orange have this big sign on them that says, "Lead them to Christ." So anyway, we gave him a hard time, and that's the reason I told Paul, and he told me that he knew him. Bless your heart, I'll pray for you. I'm going to pray for him. But just a quick word, because I know some of you might know him. We had a mayor of a town in West Virginia that came after watching Southern Baptists respond with volunteers. I brought a number of people into the town to help with home rebuilds and home repairs after flooding. And the mayor came to me and said, "I attend American Baptist Church that is not interested in reaching these people around here for Christ." And she said, "Would Southern Baptists please come and start a church?" And I went to the North American Mission Board and West Virginia Convention of Southern Baptists, and both of them said, "That's not of interest to us." Reginald heard me talking about that one day with a group of pastors, and when he became the pastor in Virginia after leaving the association, he called me one day and said, "You can take that one off your list." I said, "Why?" He said, "I just planted a church there." So that's the kind of man he is. He's a man with a sensitive spirit for God. He just likes orange instead of red. But other than that, he'll make it. All right. Take your Bibles, Galatians chapter 2 this morning. Galatians chapter 2. Let me give you some quick backdrop to the scripture passage here before I read it, so that you will understand what is taking place here. The Apostle Paul is writing to the church of Galatia, and he tells them about an important event that took place that changed the direction of his ministry, and it should change the direction of your life and mine as well. You go back to Acts chapter 13, you read the account of Paul and Barnabas being sent off on that first missionary journey. In chapter 14, they came back and reported all that God had done with them to the church at Antioch, and then they prepared to go off on a second missionary journey. What were they doing on those missionary journeys? They were simply sowing the seeds of the gospel of Jesus Christ and starting new churches. Now Paul is getting ready to go back on his second missionary journey to revisit some places where he had been, and then to go to new areas to preach the gospel. So he's going to go out and sow the seeds of the gospel, share the gospel, start new churches, and strengthen the existing churches. That should sound familiar, because that's why our convention says that it exists. But as Paul got ready for this next journey, there were some Judaizers, some legalists who showed up from Jerusalem, and they said, these Gentiles that you're preaching Christ to, Paul, they can't be Christians because they've got to become Jews before they can become Christians. And Paul said, no. So they went down to Jerusalem, and they had in Acts chapter 15 a council meeting, out of which they argued both sides of the case, and the Jewish council agreed that you did not have to become a Jew in order to become a Christian. Now I'm glad that the Judaizers lost that argument, because just this past week I enjoyed some barbecue pork. Amen. I'm kind of glad they lost the argument. But Paul went back, but Paul says, while I was there, now we pick up in Galatians 2, he says, there was something that happened while I was there. Verse 9, and when James, Cephas, and John, who seemed to be pillars, received the grace that was given unto me, they gave to me and Barnabas the right hands of fellowship, that we should go unto the heathen. That's what he calls you and I that are Gentiles. And they unto the circumcision. Only they would that we should remember the poor, the same which I was also forward or eager to do. Paul said, while we were there, Peter, James, and John, the leaders in the church in Jerusalem, took Barnabas and I aside, and they said to us, while you are excellent at sharing the gospel and starting churches, and you're going to go back and strengthen the churches, Paul, there is something that is missing in your missions program. And it is simply this: you are neglecting the poor. Now, first of all, why would Peter, James, and John say that? Peter, James, and John came from Galilee. Peter Wagner, in his book on the book of Acts, simply said, if you want to understand in our culture today what it means to be from Galilee, the best description of that is to say that they were from the coal fields of West Virginia. That is, their thought processes were different, their dietary habits were different, and they grew up in deep poverty. Here are three men who are saying to Paul, it was Paul. The best way to describe Paul and put it in our culture is simply this: his parents lived in Tarsus. To live in Tarsus as a Jew meant that you had to be extremely wealthy. Paul came from Tarsus. Not only did he come from Tarsus, but his parents sent him to study under Gamaliel. You can read that in the book of Acts. Who was Gamaliel? The best way to describe that would be to say that Paul's parents sent him to the Harvard of his day, the most expensive place to go to get an education. Paul came into life with a silver spoon in his mouth. People who are born into riches tend not to see those who are less fortunate. And here is Paul out sharing the gospel, starting churches, strengthening churches, and these three men who come from the other side of the track said, hey, wait just a minute. Paul, there is something you are neglecting because your message is incomplete without it, and that is you need to remember the poor. Now, Paul makes an interesting statement right here. He said, that very thing I was eager to do. In other words, if that's what it takes to get the gospel message out, that's what I'll do. We see that encouragement that was given by the early apostles. And Paul already had the example of Christ. The Bible tells us again and again that Jesus moved with compassion. Who does he move with compassion upon? Those who were hungry. And he broke the bread and he broke the fishes on at least 2 occasions. And he fed the multitudes as they were hungry. suffering. Who is this one? He's the one who touched the one who was suffering with the issue of blood. He's the one who healed the leper who was suffering. He's the one who touched the blind and made them see, and the mute and the deaf and made them hear and speak. It was Jesus who healed all manner of sickness and disease. But who is Jesus? He's the one in Matthew 9 who was moved with such compassion that his stomach growled within him. That's what the word compassion means there in Matthew chapter 9. He was moved with compassion. It means that his innards growled loudly, because it hurt him to see suffering people. What did Jesus say I've come to do? Luke 4:18, he said, I have come to what? Heal the brokenhearted, and feed the hungry, and make the sick well again. That was his mission. So Paul not only heard the words of encouragement, and he had the example of Jesus, he said, this I'm going to do. For the past 18 years, my world has been lived in a world of reaching out to touch those who are poor. You say, why should we worry about the poor? Well, let me give you just one example, and then I'll leave it where it's at. If I take this book and study from cover to cover, the American Bible Society tells me that 2,100 times in this book. It doesn't matter if you have a King James or an NIV, a New King James or an English Standard Version. It doesn't make any difference what Bible translation you've got. 2,100 times in this book, God addresses the way we treat the poor. One author says it's over 2,300 times. What I do know is this, that this book addresses poverty more than it addresses heaven and hell combined. You see, God takes serious. As a matter of fact, James and John both tell us in 1 John chapter 2 and James chapter 3 that the way we treat those who are poor is a direct reflection of our relationship with the Father. Because he says if we see a brother in need and we turn our back, we cannot say that we have the love of God inside of us. James said if you say you're a Christian, prove it. You see a poor man, help him. That's the Scriptures. And so Paul said, I want to do this thing. So I've been out there as your missionary. Yes, we've been sharing the gospel. Oh, we've seen over these last 18 years, over 90,000 people come to faith in Christ. They're wonderful. We've seen them give their hearts and lives to Jesus. We've seen lives changed. I've watched drunkards sober up, but people on drugs come clean, and people who didn't want to work get a job. We've watched God change lives. We started churches. I was thinking the other day, I got an email from Brian Harmon. Brian was an independent Baptist boy, and he was wanting to start a church, and he called one day and he said, Bill, I know you used to be an independent Baptist. Somebody said I can talk to you. Can I talk to you? I said, sure. What's on your mind? He said, well, can we just meet? And I took your cooperative program dollars and I bought him a cup of coffee at Bob Evans. Best cup of coffee you've ever bought. Because I sat down at that Bob Evans and I said, what's on your mind? He said, I want to plant a church and I want it to be a Southern Baptist church. I like the way you all do missions. He said, tell me how to become a Southern Baptist. And I did. It's very simple. I said, you love us and your friends will all hate you. It's very simple, and that's what happened. And he became Southern Baptist. And he went on to plant Nehemiah Baptist Church. And then he went on to Southeast Seminary to get an education and a doctorate, and now he teaches in a Baptist college and pastors Nehemiah Baptist Church. You see, you made an investment in his life. I can tell you about other church starts. I can tell you about meeting with a gas well rig guy who moved back to West Virginia. He wasn't from there, his wife was, and he came home and looked around up in Sutton and he said, there's no Southern Baptist Church here. He called and he said, I don't know anything about preaching, but I'd like to start a Southern Baptist Church. And we worked with Ace, and today we have a church. Where once there was no church. We worked with them on all extremes.
You've been out there as we've seen churches start, and we've seen them start in West Virginia, and Virginia, Kentucky, and Tennessee, and Pennsylvania, and Maryland, and New York, and Ohio. You've been there. You've also been there as we come alongside the strengthened churches. Phil Campbell called the other day, and he said, just wanted to check up on you, see how you were doing. And I remember meeting with Phil when Friars of South Willie were just 8 people in an old church building that was being reopened. I remember Phil had just come back to Christ. He'd been away from Christ for many years. He crawled up in that church when it was an American Baptist church, but now it's got 4 big sheets of plywood closing the windows. And I met with him and his mom and his dad and his wife and a couple of uncles and a couple of aunts, and they said, we want to reopen the church. Volunteers from Georgia came. Now I've been in that building and preached to 181 people and saw a young father give his heart to Christ. You see, you've been there and all of that. But at the same time, we've been on the other side of the fence working with the poor. We work with them in a variety of ways, and I will not focus on all that we do, but I want to bring it in this morning and talk about one thing that you are directly involved with us in Cleveland, Tennessee, where we work there with the co-ministries, and we work with Randy Bonner and Phil Taylor, the Director of Missions. Because one of the things that we're doing today in addressing this thing of the poor, we have ministries where we feed food to the children on the weekend. I was on the phone with Julie Carter the other day up in Harlan County, Kentucky, and every weekend she helps provide food for almost 480 boys and girls. Just one of many ministries we work with. We work with young mothers. Talked to Bessie Peak yesterday, driving down. And Bessie, I stopped in there last Saturday on my way into West Virginia to preach at Jenkins, Kentucky, with God's Love with diaper bag, and dropped off a load of blankets for Bessie. And here's Bessie. I remember 18 years ago when I first met her and her husband Lester, and they were helping young mothers. The previous 3 months, they had helped 180 young mothers keep their babies by providing diapers and baby food and baby clothes. They're now helping, working with the health department and the Department of Family and Children's Services and local hospitals and law enforcement. They're now helping almost 1,600 mothers a month keep their babies. Diapers, baby food, baby blankets. And through all of that, we're able to share the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ. But one of the unique ways that God raised up did not start out to be a ministry that we were going to become involved in. In 2001, I was your new missionary, and I went to speak at North Lanier Baptist Church in Cumming, Georgia. That morning, at the end of the service, a GA leader introduced herself to me, and I didn't think anything about it until late October when she called me and she said, I've got 300 shoeboxes filled with school supplies and hygiene items and a new Christmas toy for kids in West Virginia. I remember calling WU directors and saying, what do I do with these shoe boxes? You see, I've been pastoring for 36 years. We sent all that stuff up to Charlotte. And they said, well, take it to Charlotte. I said, no, she says, for kids in West Virginia, not China. What am I going to do with these shoe boxes? And nobody knew what to do with it because none of us have had that problem before. I remember picking them up, heading up I-75 with those shoe boxes in the back of a Plymouth van that you gave me to drive at that time, and there was only room for me and shoe boxes in that thing by the time we got it loaded. And folks, it's a Plymouth. That's a load for a Plymouth to carry. We were headed up the interstate, and I remember calling Maxine Lombardo one more time. And I said, Maxine, I know I've called you, but Maxine, I've got these shoe boxes in the van, and I'm headed north. Tell me what to do with them. And she said, Bill, I don't have a clue, but this morning while I was praying, God laid this name and number on my heart. I wrote down the number, and I called it. On the other end, when the lady answered, this was the response when I told her, this is who I am and what I've got. And the response was, she sobbed. When she finally got her composure, I heard her story. When I got there that evening to Black Wolf Baptist Church in Peckham, West Virginia, I saw the story. Floods of 2001 had come through and destroyed the bridge going over to Black Wolf Baptist Church. And this little church that had been involved in providing school supplies for the local elementary schools there in McDowell County could not do it that year. McDowell County at that time was the poorest place to live in the United States of America. Folks, when you got there, you was at the bottom of the food chain. There was no place poorer to live in. And this little church had for a number of years provided school supplies because the school system was bankrupt. The state of West Virginia had taken it over, and they were more bankrupt than the county. There was no money. But this year, with the floods, the church couldn't do it. In addition, the church had provided food for children on Sunday nights and Wednesday nights. This little church of 20 senior adults would have 150 kids, some walking 5 miles one way on railroad tracks, come in to eat on Sundays and Wednesdays. And their meal was the same week after week after week. Cheap hot dog, chips, a cookie, and cheap Kool-Aid, because that's all they could afford. But these kids were hungry. They couldn't do either now. After they'd gotten the bridge back into the church, their checking account was depleted. And the school had called, saying, help us, help us, help us repeatedly. They had called, no help came from the church. Finally, the school had called in mid-October, and the administrator had said, well, call your other Southern Baptist friends and see if any of them will help. But these two women, Nora and her friend, had called every Southern Baptist they knew, and not one Southern Baptist could help. So they came to church in the morning that I called at 6 o'clock in the morning, buried their faces in the carpet on either side of the pulpit, and pledged before God they would not get off of their face until God heard and answered their prayer. So now you understand when I called about 1 o'clock what was taking place on the other end. As a testimony to that, when I got there that night, there were wet circles on either side of the pulpit about that big around. Those two women had gotten serious with God. As we unloaded those those shoeboxes, these two sisters, I jokingly told them that we could have gotten done in 45 minutes because we had to walk a ways with them to get them into the church. I said, we could have got this done in 45 minutes if the two of you hadn't turned back Pentecostal on me. Those two women, they pick up 4 shoeboxes and they carry them in and then set them down up in front of the church, and then they'd raise their hands and they'd shout for a while. Then they go out and give 4 more, they bring them in, Brother Paul, and then they'd shout for a while. So they turned plumb Pentecostal on me, so to say. As I began to tell that story, Georgia Baptist, then South Carolina Baptist, and then North Carolina Baptist began to respond. 2011, we delivered 5,741 shoeboxes into West Virginia, East Tennessee, Southwest Virginia, Eastern Kentucky. We watched as God did the wonderful, wonderful thing of touching a child's heart through just a shoebox, filled with school supplies, hygiene items, and a new Christmas toy. But that's the year the WMU in Georgia said we need to do it different so we don't become confused with another ministry. And we did. We changed the backpacks. Not far from you is a pastor, John Waters, at Statesboro First Baptist. The year we changed, he was president of the Georgia Baptist Convention. The first year we did 5,400 backpacks out of the state of Georgia. And God spoke to his heart, and he challenged Georgia Baptists, and we have not looked back since. Now we have 9 state conventions working with us. This year our goal is 80,000. Last year we delivered 78,404 backpacks for impoverished children from Georgia to New Orleans all the way up into Vermont. We watched as God touched and changed lives all across that region. We saw over 2,366 pray to receive Christ. Last year, over 9,000 have been saved off the backpacks alone. Why? Because we're reaching out to a child in poverty and touching a life. And we're watching as parents, like this story is repeated so many times, and in so many places. It's a mother who comes and she says, you all don't know, I'm a single mom. I work 2 jobs, or I work 3 jobs, and I can't make ends meet. I can't take care of my family. It's so frustrating. We'll hear this story every year. My little girl wanted just one Barbie doll. Every time I would take my kids and go to Walmart to buy groceries, they would run and get this one Barbie doll and come and say, Mommy, this is all I want for Christmas. It's the only thing I've ever wanted in the whole world. If you get this, I'll never ask for anything else. But I have to look at my daughter and say, I can't afford groceries. I can't afford clothes. I can't buy you a coat. I can't afford a Barbie doll. Put it back. Now, you men don't understand the miracle of this, so go to your next Walmart, go look at the Barbie doll section. Because when a mother unzips a backpack, or a girl does it, inside is the very Barbie doll she wanted, and that thing has been handled on an average of 8 times by 8 different groups, moving it to where it's going. There is a miracle on the other end that only God can understand. Amen. And I watch year after year as mothers give their hearts to Christ because of that. You say, but what's involved in that? These backpacks are child focused. We're focusing upon the child. They're Christ-centered. Well, that's the reason we want the Christmas story in there, because we want that child to know that God loves them and Christ came into the world, and we call that Christmas. And He went to the cross and He died for them out of His love. We want them to know that. They're church connected. We're doing all we can do to connect them back to the local church. We want the local church to know. You say, but does that work? Up in Cincinnati, Ohio, the North End, 2016, we had a church planter who said, I don't want the backpacks. He was working in an impoverished community. 2017, he called me up on the phone and he said, can I sign up for the backpacks? I said, sure. He said, well, it's late. I said, that's okay. I said, but what's going on? You turned them down last year. He said, I'm at the end of my 2nd year with the North American Mission Board, and they've told me my funding's ending. And he said, I'm going to confess to you, Mr. Parker, in 2 years, I've not been able to reach one person for Christ. So I've tried. I said, we'll do backpacks. How many do you want? He said, 100. I said, okay. We took 100 backpacks in there. He called me in January of 2018 and he said, Mr. Barker, I want to sign up right now for the backpacks next year. I said, not going to procrastinate this year? He said, no. I said, tell me what's up? You sound excited. He said, I've already been able to reach 6 families for Christ off of the backpacks. He called me later in the year and he said, you know those 6 families? I said, yes. He said, I've now baptized every member of the family. Before the year was out, he ended up baptizing. Before the year was out, he ended up reaching a total of 13 families for Christ. You see the impact. That story is repeated again and again and again as we watch as God takes something as simple as a backpack, but He uses it to speak to a heart, to change a mom or a dad on the other side. So Dad showed up at St. Lucia in Speedwell, Tennessee. And as Miss Tammy was standing there watching as the kids had gotten their backpacks and they went over and sat down in the corner and they unzipped and they began to pull their things out of them, Miss Tammy said suddenly this boy came screaming across the room, jumping up and down and hollering, Daddy, there is a God! Daddy, there is a God! Daddy, there is a God! Tammy said the father came to her later and said, Tammy, I need to tell you the story. I used to be a believer. But times have been hard. I work in construction and there's been no work. And for 2 years I've not been able to find work. I can barely feed my family. We struggle to get by. I've lost almost everything trying to find work and just no work. And he said, I take my son to go to Walmart. He said, since November, every time we go down to get groceries, he gets this Lego game, and he comes over and says, Daddy, this is what I want for Christmas. And he said, every week I tell him, son, Daddy can't even afford to buy food for you and your sisters and your mom. Just put that back. He said last week we were at Walmart, and he said my little boy came over with that Lego game, and he said, Daddy, this is all I want in the whole wide world for Christmas. This is all I want. And he said, I just felt so bad. He said, I was irritable. He said, I hadn't been able to find a job. I knew I was spending the last money in my wallet. And I just looked at him and said, well, if there's a God, you better tell him about it. Put it back. He said, my boy walked off crying and put it back. He said, Miss Tammy, can you help me find my way back to that God? There that day, that ministry center director knelt and let that father like the faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. Just about that. We get to see God do some humorous things, like in the gym with 125 kids and someone unzipped a backpack. And suddenly there's a little boy running around the gym, jumping up and down with a pair of underwear over his head and yelling, I got new underwear, I got new underwear, I got new underwear. The director looked at me and said, I suggest you put your fingers in your ears. I said, why? Then I found out why. In a moment there was 125 kids running around saying, I got new underwear, I got new underwear. It's like, that's so simple. But if we put those together, some of the places we go, we take food. Last 2 years, we've helped over 450 homeless children a year in 3 locations. That's 3 locations combined, about 450 kids. Kids whose parents have been evicted because they couldn't pay the rent, or people who have lost jobs and can't find them and they have nowhere to stay any longer. They live in abandoned houses or live in tents in the woods. In one of the cases outside of the Folly, Tennessee, a little girl that got a backpack sent us a note. The backpack came from Social Circle First Baptist Church here in Georgia. Sent a note to us through a school teacher that said, thank you for the food in my backpack. It's all I got to eat during the Christmas holiday. Another little girl outside of Blackie, Kentucky wrote and said, thank you for the food in my backpack. It's all I got to eat Christmas Day. But in the midst of all of that, God has a sense of humor. For a little boy in Kentucky wrote a note in 217 that I dearly love. It said, thank you for them canned hot dogs. I love them. Send me more. I told that story at WVU in Fayetteville. First Baptist outside of Atlanta heard me tell it. So last year on my way home from the convention, they called and said, we want you to meet us. And they gave me shoes and some backpack material, but one of the ladies gave me 3 of the biggest cases of Iowa sausage I've ever seen. Now, like your pastor, I used to work in the grocery business, but they never came that big, brother. She said she got them at Sam's Club, big boxes. Now, I loaded those in the back of the pickup truck. I was planning to go to Kentucky with it. I drove to Ebenezer Baptist Church outside of Blairsville, Georgia, over toward Tallahassee. As I got out of the truck and we started loading some coats and shoes that Pastor Tommy needed, he saw those bags of sausage and he said, what are you going to do with those? Rather than say, I'm taking them to Kentucky, I said, why? He said, Bill, our cupboards are bare and that's our kids' favorite food. He said, we got some kids coming in here Saturday. And he said, quite frankly, I don't have the money to buy food to feed them when they come this Friday, Saturday. He said, any way I can get one of those boxes? And I said, Tom, if you've got bulbs in your legs, you can unload all 3 of them if you want to. I went back over there to preach later, and so the kids came and they told me that I ain't a sausage man. But you see, God cares for the poor. Amen. You say, well, we do the backpacks. We're meeting spiritually, physically, emotionally needs. We're watching as God is changing lives. But at the end of the day, why do we do it? And I close this morning with a story. It goes back to the beginning of this, and I was preaching down in War, West Virginia, McDowell County. It was Sunday after we had been in there passing out food boxes, taking Christmas to some kids. local school system had called and said, we have 146 kids, and when they leave school to go home on Friday for Christmas holidays, they'll not get another meal until school starts in Southern Baptist help. I made some phone calls, and we had churches in Georgia and North Carolina that said would help. And so we did 146 food boxes. We showed up on a Saturday. The school administrator had very carefully given us directions. Because didn't want every student to know what was taking place, we did it on the Saturday, as I said, and he had written on there, Bill Jones, here's the address, and here's the directions. And he took us to the houses. The churches had received information on the child or children in the house earlier. And they went out to deliver. It was a rain in the air and a wet, muddy day in southern West Virginia. One of the men from North Carolina came to his last delivery. And when he got there, it was a hill. He said it was a hill filled with ruts. He said, my pickup truck just wouldn't pull the hill. He said, though I had four-wheel drive, I just couldn't get up it. And so I had finally backed off in the back of the church and said to the pastor, Travis Hyde, I can't deliver my last. Travis said, oh yeah, you can. He said, let me go out here. Went to the next door. Neighbor had an old military Jeep there, and he said, he'll let you borrow his Jeep. Take it, he'll pull that hill. So he took the Jeep and the stuff and his wife, and they pulled up on the hill. The man was telling me this in the pastor's study on Sunday morning. He said, Brother Parker, my dogs live in better conditions in North Carolina than the house that I went to. He said, it was a single wide sitting up on the side of the hill. He said, I went up and knocked on the door. Lady came to the door, and I told her who it was and what we had. And she said, Mister, you might ought to just set it inside the door and slide it, because you don't know where the holes are and you'll fall through. And she said, I'll take care of them after y'all leave. He said, we got the boxes of stuff, about 3, and the stuff of the little girl. We slid it into the door, and then he said, being that we were with the church, he said, I just turned and said, ma'am, I'm here representing Calvary Baptist Church down in Ward. I'd like to invite you to come go to church tomorrow and bring a little daughter with you. The lady said, Mister, I'm sorry. He said, I work 2 jobs and I'm a single mom. And she said, I can't make ends meet. I can't make enough money around here to keep my clunker board and pay the rent. She says, you can tell we don't have food. My little girl don't have adequate clothes. We just don't have what it takes. But while the mother was graciously declining, the little girl was standing there doing what 9-year-old girls do. I want to go, I want to go, I want to go, I want to go. So he just asked, can I come pick up your daughter? To a total stranger. The lady said, you don't want to take her to church, come get her. So the next morning, they took the Jeep and drove up and picked up a little girl named Tammy, took her to church. Now they've told me all of this. I've been back in the pastor's study. And as we come out to get ready for the morning service, out of the door on the other side comes Debbie King, who heads up the ministry to the children there, called the Teen Center. Debbie's coming out and got 4 or 5 kids around her, and the pastor says, why, there's Tammy with Debbie. Tammy, come here. I got somebody I want you to meet. So this little girl with the biggest brown eyes I've ever seen in my life. She came out, she started over. And the pastor said, Tammy, here's somebody I want you to meet. Well, my wife is 5 foot tall. I've learned to live on my knees so we can have an eyeball-to-eyeball conversation. So I just got down like this and stuck out my hand. Little Tammy came over and took my hand and said, who are you? I said, I'm Bill Parker. What's your name? Tammy, what you do? I said, I'm a missionary. She said, what's a missionary? I said, a missionary is somebody that tells other people about Jesus. And as soon as I said that, she dropped my hand and she stepped back and she said, Jesus loves me. Who is Jesus? Why does he love me? You see, that morning, the first time in Sunday school, that little girl heard from Miss Debbie that Jesus loved her. While I preached that morning, she sat with a couple from North Carolina, sat on the second pew back. And repeatedly during the message, she would punch the pastor's wife, and I could see her say, Jesus loves me. Who is Jesus? Why does he love me? That's why we do what we do, folks.
Amen.
There's a whole world out there that needs to know this. And I want to thank you for your involvement in going to Cleveland to work with the ministry there. You're touching lives of children in Bradley County who may never experience or know the love of Christ except through you. Jesus said in Matthew 25 that when we do something to one of those who are hurting or struggling, it's as if we have done it unto him.
Amen.
So you're doing a ministry that is so vital. You say, I'd like to become involved as senior pastor. You say, it's Jesus you've talked about. I don't know. The moment we're going to have an invitation. God is speaking to you. Listen. Hear his voice. Would you bow your heads with me? Father, this morning, I thank you for a church that is faithful, for a pastor, for leadership that is faithful. Father, as churches like Elam Egypt that have made it possible for me over the years to be able to touch the lives of children like the Kennedys, to touch the lives of fathers like David and Bob and Doc, to watch mothers' lives radically change like Judy and Tabitha and others. For the power is in the gospel of Jesus Christ. I thank you for the faithfulness of this association and this church and working there in Bradley County these many years. Now, Father, as we come to this point, speak to our hearts. Oh, Father, may we be diligent to do that which you've called us to do, to touch lives, to see people changed. For it's in your name.